Okay, so today what we're going to be working on is writing an equation if we're given rational roots. So we're given the zeros. Well, we're given the answers to a polynomial function, like a quadratic, and we're going to try to come up with the equation. Okay, we're going to try to come up with these equations if we're given the answers. Okay, so I want you to do the try this. The try this is to solve for x by factoring. So you're going to factor and then you make the t-chart. So remember, when you factor, the first thing you look for is GCF, greatest common factor. If it's two terms, then we look for dots. Always GCF first, though, because you could have a GCF and then dots. And then three terms would be master product. That's when you multiply the first times the last. And again, GCF always first. And four terms is grouping. Okay? So put me on pause, do the try this, and then come back and check your answers. Okay, so let's take a look at number one. So number one, I notice I have x squared plus 8x. Only two terms, but I don't go right to dots, okay? Because first of all, it's not dots, okay? Because I don't have 8's not a perfect square. It's not subtraction, okay? Remember, I always look for GCF, the greatest common factor. So I see there is a GCF because they both contain at least one x. So the GCF is x. All right, so I'm going to factor out the x. So I have an x on the outside, one set of parentheses, because that's all we have for GCF. And then we're going to get what goes inside. If you're not sure, divide everything by x. All right, x squared divided by x is x. 8x divided by x is 8. All right, so now that I have it factored, I separate each of my factors. I have two factors. This is a factor and this is a factor. I draw a t-chart, separate them with the bar. And then you set each factor equal to 0. So x equals 0. And x plus 8 equals 0. And now you solve for x. Now, this is nice because this one's already solved for 0. Okay, so one of my answers is 0. On the right side, I'm going to minus 8 from both sides. The 8's cancel, so I'm left with x equals negative 8. So I have two answers, x equals 0 and x equals negative 8. So those are my zeros. Remember, they're also called roots. All right, so let's take a look at number 2. So when I look at number 2, I see that there's three terms. I'm thinking master product, but I want to make sure there's no GCF first. So I look, I have an x squared, a 3x. There's no x here. There's no number that goes into 1, 3, and 10, so there's no GCF. So I'm going to go right to master product. All right, so remember, we multiply the first times the last. So x squared times negative 10 is negative 10x squared. Now we say to ourselves, what multiplies to 10 minuses to a 3? That's 5x and 2x. When I multiply 5 times 2, it has to be different signs. That's the only way to get a negative. When I add them, it has to give me positive 3. So it has to be positive 5 and negative 2. Bring down the 10, still equals 0, and bring down the x squared. All right, so now I have 4 terms, and I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to have the red group and the purple group. All right, in the red group, there's a GCF of x, so then it's x plus 5. Sorry, I'm doing the video in school. That's why you hear the bell. I notice there's a negative here, so I'm going to factor out that negative. And then look at the numbers. I have 2 and 10, so my GCF would be negative 2. Times x plus 5. It has to be a plus 5 so that when I multiply by negative 2, I get negative 10. All right, so notice the parentheses are the same, right? I have x plus 5, that should be like that. So I have x minus 2 times x plus 5 equals 0. So I have my two factors. One of my factors is x minus 2. The other factor is x plus 5. Draw your t-chart right in between the two factors. Set them equal to 0. X minus 2 equals 0. X plus 5 equals 0. Now solve. Add 2. X equals 2. Minus 5. X equals negative 5. So my roots, my zeros, my solutions are 2 and negative 5. All right, so what we're going to do today is go backwards. I'm going to give you the zeros, the solutions. I'm going to give you the end. We have to come up with the beginning. Okay, so what we're going to do is just work on factoring backwards. Now, this only works when we're given rational roots. What are rational zeros, rational roots? That's when you have a number, an integer, or a fraction. So that means no radicals and no i's. Okay? All right, so I'm just going to pull this up a tiny bit. All right, so like I said, we're going to just work on backwards factoring. So look at the example. We'll go through the steps as we look at the example. My zeros, my roots are negative 5 and 0. So take a look at this problem right here. The last step I had was that they were equal to x. So that's what I'm going to do first. Set the zeros equal to x. So I'm going to put the 0 on the left. X equals 0 and x equals negative 5. All right, now, look at the step before they were equal to x, right? So before they were equal to x, right, they were equal to 0. Well, this one was equal to 0. This one's already equal to 0. So I have to get this 8, negative 8, back over to this side so that it's equal to 0. So this one is already 0. This one, I have to make it equal to 0. So that's the next step. Make each equation equal to 0. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I have x plus 5 equals 0. Now notice up here in the practice problem of the factoring, I have them equal to 0. And before that, they were listed as factors, right? We factored them, and I had my factor of x and my factor of x plus 8 equals 0. So these are my factors. X is a factor, x plus 5 is a factor. So put them in parentheses so that we can multiply them. So I'm going to have x times x plus 5 equals 0. Those are my factors. So now, how do I go from factored form, so look here in the do now, back to the equation form? Now remember, factored form is just a multiplication form. It takes the original and puts it in a multiplication. So if I'm in a multiplication form, how do I go back to like an original? Multiply them. So what we're going to do now is distribute. So I have x times x is x squared. X times 5 is positive 5x, and you have to make sure it's equal to 0. Because if you don't set it equal to 0, it's not an equation. It's just an expression. Okay? Make sure it's equal to 0. If there's any like terms in the end, you would combine them. Okay, so let's take a look at number 2. So my zeros are negative 1 and 4. All right, so I'm going to first start off by setting each one equal to x. Right, so that's the first step. So I have x equals negative 1 and x equals 4. Okay? So if you look at the try this, right, that's what I had my last answer, right? They were equal to x. Now I have to get them to equal 0. That was the step before. Before they were equal to the number, they were equal to 0. Okay, so that's my next step. My next step is to set them equal to 0. Okay, add 1, x plus 1 equals 0, minus 4, x minus 4 equals 0. All right, so now, before they were equal to 0, they were set up as factors, right? Look, they were in factors, and then I drew my t-chart, set them equal to 0. So I'm going to put these in parentheses and be my factors. So now put them in parentheses. It still has to equal 0. So we have x plus 1 in parentheses, x minus 4 in parentheses, still equals 0. Now, how do I go from factored form to a regular form, the standard form? You distribute. You multiply. That's what we're going to do now. X times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. 1 times x is 1x, and 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. Make sure it still equals 0. All right, and then you're going to clean it up. The middles here can combine. They're like terms, so we have x squared. Negative 4x plus 1x is negative 3x minus 4 equals 0. That's my final answer. All right, let's take a look at number 3. All right, so number 3 may be a little tricky because there are fractions there. So I'm just going to get myself a little bit of room here. Okay, but still going to be the same thing. We're going to first set each one equal to 0. So we're going to have equal to x, 3 over 4, and x equals 2. All right, now, with the fraction, the easiest thing to do is to, so I'm just going to put brackets around, write a little note, put x over 1, then cross multiply. So you don't want to be dealing with the fractions, okay? So that's the easiest thing to do. Put this over 1. And cross multiply. So we have 4 times x here is 4x equals, when you cross multiply, 3 times 1 is 3. Now we can set them equal to 0. That's the next step. So minus 3, 4x minus 3 equals 0. On the right side, minus 2, x minus 2 equals 0. Now, these are my factors, right? So I'm going to take these and put them in parentheses. 4x minus 3 times x minus 2. Make sure it's still equal to 0. All right, now we're going to double distribute. 4x times x is 4x squared. 4x times negative 2 is negative 8x. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Still equals 0. Now just combine like terms. So my like terms are right here in the middle. So I have 4x squared, negative 8x minus 3x is negative 11x plus 6 equals 0. Okay, so that's it, and we'll practice in class tomorrow. Everybody have a good night.